Now, I'm laying all my hopes on Benjamin and Elijah. And you're talking to Tracy and Eric, and please give us something worth talking about.
A nice biblical name.
Hey guys.
Hello.
We just want to ask some questions just because we're not really familiar with atheism.
That's the best time to ask questions, when you want to know more. Totally.
Yeah, that's what we want to call in for.
Yeah, because we are theists, yes, but we just don't know much about atheism.
Thank you for calling, and we're happy to answer.
So kind of what are like the basic foundations of atheism?
May
I?
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Sure. So let's start by the word atheism, right? A is the rejection of theism. It's the negation of the statement that a God exists or a personal God exists. So it's only the answer to the single question, does a God exist? Everything else, you got to look elsewhere. I mean, we're skeptics, we're secular humanists, and those things help inform our morality and the way that we look at the world.
So the reality is, beyond not believing in a God, you have to ask each, and it sounds really weird, but you're going to have to ask each atheist what they believe or don't believe about any particular topic, because there's no creed.
And there are some atheists that believe some weird stuff.
There are.
Yeah, we have a problem with that because, yes, we do believe in asking questions and learning more. I mean, that's what we're all about. So,
what are your two viewpoints and things you disagree with?
About what topics? It's a big world.
Surprise me, any topic.
I like purple.
Okay, he likes purple. And I have no favorite color, so there's a disagreement right there.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not.
Okay.
He can like purple, and me not having a favorite color doesn't really impact that he likes purple. So I guess
You're not
a
helping the
disagreement,
atheist
but
case here.
I'm just saying, we have different opinions on colors.
Right, doesn't make either one of you right or wrong.
Sometimes, though, atheists could be wrong about a thing, and somebody else could be. I mean, I've been corrected on certain things that I've thought were correct, and somebody will point out, "Oh, that's wrong." I remember. It's embarrassing, but it's like I remember posting something about how science can't explain how bees can fly. Okay, I fell for it, and then somebody was like, "Yeah, that's kind of an old wives' tale. It's not really true." And then so I looked into it, and I was like, "Oh, okay, so yeah, there's an explanation for how bees can fly." So sometimes I can be wrong about things.
Yeah.
Right. We all get wrong at things at times. So why don't you believe in God?
Okay, so let's, again, remember the part where I said it's the negation of the statement?
Yes, I remember that.
Okay, so let's be clear about this, right? Am I speaking to Ben or Elijah?
I think you're talking to both of them, right?
Ben. Okay. Tracy has a jar of gumballs. Okay? You and I both walk in. We've never seen the jar. Tracy's got the jar. She says, you need to guess whether there's an even amount of gumballs or an odd amount of gumballs in the jar. And I say, Tracy, I know for a fact that there's an even amount of gumballs in that jar. Ben, do you believe me?
Yeah.
I know for a fact it's an even number of gumballs in that jar.
Even though he's never seen the jar.
Yeah.
Until the same time you did.
Well, you could be wrong. It could be an odd amount of gumballs.
Well, hold on, Ben. Are you saying that you know for a fact there's an odd number of gumballs in that jar?
I don't know for a fact. I'm just guessing because maybe there is an even amount. Maybe there is an odd.
Yeah, maybe, but we should probably wait until we count the gumballs, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's the intellectually honest thing to do, right?
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. That's where we are with atheism.
So just to kind of help put that in perspective, what he's trying to illustrate is the idea that first and foremost, atheism would be the idea that there's something called agnostic atheism, which I think most atheists identify with, which is the idea that I don't know how many gumballs are in the jar, right? I don't know if there's a God or not, so I'm not I'm not pinning anything down on this yet. So let me just wait until there's better information, because right now there's not enough information for me to make that decision. People are making a lot of claims, and I'm not buying any of it until I have better information. So that's the position of a lot of atheists. Some atheists go a little further, and they're just like, I think it's bunk. And that's like another attitude where the thing they have in common, though, is that they don't believe. But your follow-up question was, well, why don't you believe? And that's going to vary a little bit. But most often, you're going to get one of two answers. You're going to get somebody who's going to say that they actually feel that they can solidly say that they don't think that there could be a God that exists. And then you're going to have a larger batch probably that's going to say, because I'm not convinced, I don't think that there's sufficient evidence for me to, hang my hat on at this point. Does that help you understand where they're coming from or where we're coming from?
Yeah, that helps us understand different point of views about it.
Okay. I like the fact that you differentiated, that belief from the reasoning, because that really is an important thing to keep separate. To say that it's the common ground is not believing, but there are different reasons and different perspectives that people can come from to get to that decision.
Yeah, it's the same with religion too. Other people have different ideas. I've met a couple Christians that believe in evolution. Mm-hmm. They're neither right nor wrong, really. We can't really prove it either way. But there's always different viewpoints for a topic.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's so uncomfortable.
Eric is I think
you're the host.
I would just say, what aspect of evolution do you think? So, for example, let's say that I wanted to breed a new breed of dog. I'm a dog breeder, and I have this idea for a new breed, and I start breeding, and I like what I'm finding, and so I keep on breeding until I get this look that I want, right? This breed that I would like to apply to the whoever the group is that makes the dog breeds, right? The American Breeders Association or something. And I want to get my new breed approved. So if we say evolution doesn't happen and that we can't tell if it's right or wrong, do you have any kind of explanation as to how I produced that particular dog breed if we don't use evolution as our model?
Oh, I'm not sure about any of that because I'm totally not an expert, but we were just wondering, because a lot of evolutionists argue that, or I should say that species, for example, or like a dinosaur can evolve into like a bird, or birds can be from dinosaurs. But
there's this breakdown. Let's just go through this in little steps. Let's take little chunks and we'll see where we start to disagree. So we do agree, let's say that, I'm going to say we agree, and then you tell me if I'm wrong. So I would say that we do agree that people, or a species, a population that can breed sexually, will pass on genes to a future generation. Do we agree with that?
We agree, yes.
Okay. And we also agree, and again, I'm not assuming it, I'm just saying it, and you tell me if I'm where I go wrong. We also agree that by breeding for particular traits, like if I like a particular color of hair or color of fur or pattern, I should be able to selectively choose animals to breed them so that future generations then will express that trait more and more and express the traits I don't want less and less by selectively breeding. Do we agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like breeding plants to get a certain flower.
Yeah, and now some things are asexual and they produce clones, right? And it's the same plant over and over. But when you have sexual breeding where genes are coming from a parent population, then you have variation, and you can control for that by selecting.
Well, plants can technically be sexual too through.
They can. Oh yeah, they can. No, I'm not saying that they can't, but I'm saying that there are some things clone, and those would be sort of different than what we're talking about here. But yes, plants can be bred sexually as well. They have very prominent sex organs, in fact. So what the basic fundamental, like, let's just say this is the baseline evolution concept is that when I have a population that can breed, right, within it, that population, because not all species can breed with each other. So when you have a breeding population, you can if pressure is exerted that makes certain traits selected for, right, then the future generations will express that more and express less the traits that we genetically choose against. And by doing that, we can change what's called, there's a little saying, when I was in school, they taught it, and it was, the phenotype follows the genotype. And all that, a phenotype is just, think of it in terms of traits that an individual can have, right? So I have brown hair.
Right, we know about genotypes.
Okay, great. So the phenotypes can be altered in subsequent generations by selecting for or against certain traits. Now, if we do this as the dog breeder, we're artificially selecting, right? So I'm using artificial selection. I'm controlling it, and I am producing a specific look in the next generations, trying and to get this look and selecting for some traits against others. And then I'm changing the phenotypic traits of the species. I'm changing the hair color, whether or not they even have hair, right? You see the hairless cats, and so you can, let's weed out hair entirely or fur entirely. Let's make the ears folded. Let's make the legs shorter. And you can change this, and then you can create a breeding population that actually has these traits that they start breeding, and they're their own population at that point. They can probably still interbreed with the parent populations, because those are very close in time, right? So from a very basic standpoint, the idea of evolution is just that. So you have this idea that species can change over time based on traits being selected for or against. What Darwin added to this was to say that he felt like selection can happen through natural causes, okay? So that you don't have to have a dog breeder choosing the dogs, that something could happen to separate these populations, and then one of them has particular survival pressures put on them that are different than where this other part of the population went, and they have different survival pressures put on them, and both of them in nature, because of those pressures, are going to have traits selected for or against, like whether or not you have a fur pattern that is good at camouflage in the trees, whereas the other population goes off into the plains, gets split off into the plains, and they end up having to be stealthy and to be, creep along a little more quietly, and maybe they look better if they're just plain old, tan colored or brown colored or something, whereas the other one ends up with stripes. Eventually... Well,
I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying that, like, depending on the environment, depends on how the animal is going to change.
Well, that's the idea behind natural selection, right? Is that the same pressures that we could put on an animal to breed them very swiftly could be put on an animal when an environment changes, right? You're going to have different things that are useful in a different environment than you had in the prior environment. Does that make sense?
That does, but wouldn't that be more adaptation rather than evolution?
No, because it's going to be happening through changes in the gene frequencies of the population. So it by definition is evolution.
And eventually, if you leave those groups alone long enough, they'll no longer be able to interbreed, and that's when you get speciation, and you get new species that can no longer... Right,
but and just to kind of speak to what Eric's saying, there's this idea, I think, or misconception I think some people have, that there's these little changes, and then sometimes there's these gargantuan big changes, when really what happens is, a big change is just a lot of little changes over time. It's not that, there's it's not like, so when people are like, well, why don't dogs give birth to cats? It's like, well, that's a big caricature of what evolution's actually saying happens, right? It's not saying that there's this giant shift in the phenotypes in one generation. And it sounds like you understand that.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So, I mean, we do agree on a lot here, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, we really do. But, like, I still don't quite understand. Okay, let's say we have dog A and dog B. Mm-hmm. Well, dog B doesn't exist yet. Okay. It's going to come later through evolution. So at what point, I know you can't really answer this because we haven't really studied enough science about this, but what point will that species A turn into that species B? Because that species B has to have species B parent, and it's got to make species B offspring.
This is called,
how does the A
this is called speciation, right? And speciation can occur and has occurred. And so I would recommend, if you want examples of speciation, because you're right, it's not like I carry these around in my head, but if you want to see, if you want to see like a list of speciation, there's a place called Talk Origins, right? And I will tell you right up front, the main purpose of the site is to deal with creationist claims, like young earth creationist claims. And so they kind of give the answers when people say like, well, what, there's no such thing as, no one's ever observed speciation. And they will give the examples of speciation that has been observed. And so when people have questions about evolution, Talk Origins is a pretty good site that just kind of says, here's the claims we hear most often, and here would be the examples that would apply to those questions. So I don't carry around the list of speciation events in my head. And I would think that even if you went to Talk Origins and you did look at their list, you would probably want to go do further research on your own. And I certainly wouldn't blame you for that. I would say I encourage it. So I wouldn't just say go to Talk Origins and there's your answer. I would say go to Talk Origins, look up the list of speciation, right, under speciation, and look at those examples, and then go look at them up on your own and see if you think they're valid or if you have problems with them.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, I just have one more quick question about like evolution stuff. Well, I mean,
okay.
It's not really evolution, but it's,
okay, because I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so I'm just kind of doing my best here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know. Well, I mean, I'm kind of confused because we were talking about, how people want to have a certain like breed and certain types of traits, but where do like mutations fall into this?
So yeah, you can have genes can mutate, right? And I think that they probably could kick out some other diversity. I doubt that commonly speaking, a mutation would result in like a huge population shift. It would take a lot of metrics falling into place together. So you'd have to have a significant enough mutation to have an effect on the animal's survival, and it would have to be beneficial in that environment or pretty quickly in an environment that's changing. So you'd have to have like a beneficial mutation for it to continue, which isn't impossible, but I think when I'm thinking in terms of mutations, a lot of times they're going to be negative things that will not continue, or in some instances they're going to be situations where it's kind of benign and it may or may not become good or bad later or exaggerated or somehow feed into the population in other ways. But finding a beneficial one, of course, that I would think that would happen occasionally, but I don't think it's going to be the most common example of how mutations would fit into this.
All right, yeah, that helps kind of, but I have another question also, if you don't mind. But I mean, as atheists, this might sound obvious, like, can you be good without God, or where do morals come from?
No, we're in trouble.
We're horrible people.
Yeah.
No. No, I'll let Eric go, and then if I have anything to add, I'll add it.
Okay.
Sure. So it's a really wonderful place. I want to commend you as well for being so open and honest and ready to ask questions and meet us where we're at, just like we're wanting to meet you where we're at. And I really do want to just emphasize the importance of us being able to have this discussion. So thank you both.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So, can you be good without God? Well, yeah. Because where does God come into it? I mean, is there any part of the Bible that is so pivotal that we can't address the same things? I mean, as far as we're concerned, you're just the same as us, man. So, like, what about the Bible?
Well, I would just add, if I can, the idea of what you were asking, like, where do I think morality comes from, right? Like, what is it?
That's more.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so there's what I find really interesting is studies on other species and what's called moral metrics or moral tendencies. Some people call it proto-morality because they're totally uncomfortable acknowledging that another species could have a moral tendency, but I tend to think that I do believe we share some tendencies with some of these other species that I am comfortable calling moral tendencies. So the question becomes, what are you testing for? So if you wanted to know, let's say another species, you're looking at another species, you want to know if that animal is moral, right? Okay, I'm a human being, I feel like I'm moral. I want to know if this dog can be moral, right? Does the dog have any kind of morality to it? What kind of things would you test for, right? So you have to kind of define what it is that you're calling morality if you're going to see if the dog can behave morally. How are you going to test it? What are you looking for? And so for me,
that's hard to do though, because everyone's point of view for for morality is different. Everyone could be different. Like you said, your favorite color. One of your guys like purple, one of you may like pink.
But this is why it's super useful to read animal studies when they do studies to test animals for moral tendencies, because it forces people to identify and define what they consider moral. So there's tests that go on with human beings where people will take you I'm sure are familiar with moral dilemmas, right? Because you guys sound like the type that would probably be familiar with them. Like those questions where, it's like there's no right answer. Every answer is horrible. Basically, which horrible thing would you choose out of these horrible scenarios? And so, okay. But the point with those tests is to try to get people to think about their morality a little bit, right? Like, why am I choosing this? And what is my thinking on this? And in order to, and this helps us define what we're calling morality in people, which helps us define what we would be looking for in another species. So there actually are some metrics that are put forward that we say, this is part of what comes together to form morality. And some of those things would be, mainly it's stuff that's going to impact your relationships with others, okay? Others of your own species. So the idea of, do you understand or do you want fairness, right? So do you have a comprehension of fairness? Do you have some comprehension of empathy? Do you see this other being? Do I see Eric as being like me? So that if something happens to Eric, I think, oh, if that happened to me, right, that his arm gets hurt, and I'm thinking, oh, that must hurt because it would hurt if it happened to me. So I mirror myself in Eric because he's a human being and I'm a human being, and so I relate to him on this really unique level. And so we have empathy for one another, and we have a sense of fairness for one another. Now, I'm not saying every individual in the species has it, but the species as a whole has a tendency toward these traits, right? Toward empathy, equity, fairness, obligation, the tight sense of obligation, right? And there's also things like guilt and things like shame that we can actually leverage against people, right? We know that human beings are capable of feeling these things. It's all the things that we tend to look at as those emotional drives, right? Those instinctual drives that gear toward each other as opposed to just ourselves or just an object. Things that allow me to know that Eric is an agent and Eric is not an object, and make me respect him as a human. And so the question is, does a dog have a sense of fairness? Does a chimpanzee have a sense of fairness? Does it have a sense of empathy? And you can actually test for these things. It's very interesting. And it turns out that dogs do have a sense of fairness, and it's different than our sense of fairness, which is more similar to a chimpanzee's sense of fairness, right? So in one study, they had dogs that were doing tricks, and they would give them treats. And what they found in the particular study that they worked on was that when you gave the dogs treats, when they saw each other get treats for the tricks, they were content, and they kept doing tricks to get these treats. And it didn't really matter the grade of the treat. So if you gave one dog what would be considered like a higher grade treat, like real meat as opposed to a kibble, it didn't affect the dog's tendencies to continue cooperating. But when you treat them, when you don't give one dog a treat and you give another dog a treat, the dog that's not getting treats will stop cooperating much sooner. So he's just like, wait a minute, he's getting treats, right? Like, I'm not going to keep working, I'm not getting treats. And so when you do the similar thing with chimpanzees, they actually do look at the quality of the treat, right? They will get a little bit, I'm not cooperating anymore because they're getting something way better than me. Yeah. And people are kind of like lean more toward that. We don't just see compensation, we see levels of compensation, right? And so
Right.
there are different senses of fairness, which is, to me, a really interesting thing. But what it shows me is that these kinds of metrics can exist in other species, but they might be different than what we understand them to be, but they're still demonstrable. So for me, when I think about morality, I think of all these different, like a list of different traits that we would identify as separate things, but they would all come into play in my interactions with another person. Right?
Yeah, like we share them and
Right.
stuff. Yeah.
Now, what's also interesting is there's this thing called the silver fox experiment, right? Where they actually took these silver foxes who are mostly rogue animals, right? And even a rogue animal has to socialize sometimes, right? So a rogue animal will go out and it has to socialize when it breeds. Right, they have to hook up and breed. They will socialize when they come into conflict with territory. So I come to the edge of my territory and you're there, and I don't expect you to be there because this is my territory, and so we'll have an interaction there. So they do still recognize each other as a species. They recognize one another as a fox, as opposed to a predator or a prey animal. But at the same time, they are very, very solitary animals. But they are also highly prized for their fur. Right? So in the fur trade, they have a lot of these animals that they have to deal with, and one problem is they are very ferocious animals. They're very vicious little foxes. So one guy got the idea to make them more passive. So he started breeding them for passivity. The animals that didn't attack the cage every time he walked by, he started trying to breed those to try and create something that was easier to work with.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, eventually, he created something that was almost like a little dog. It didn't even look like the fox anymore. The coat was totally different. It had this curly, crazy tail. It barked. The foxes never made noises other than like snarling and growling and assaulting the cage. But these little guys, they were just adorable little fluff balls, right? And he didn't expect to breed something that looked completely different. In fact, that was against, they wanted to try and breed something with the same fur, and they got all across the board, different types of fur and cute little things that were barking and social. And so these little guys were more inclined to socialize, which is what is required for those moral metrics, right? I mean, if I just run around by myself all the time, I don't really need to have a whole lot of those metrics. But if you breed, my species to the point where we start actually interacting more in a friendly way, that's a demonstration, I would think, of instilling morality, or at least moral tendencies, or to make some people more comfortable, proto-moral tendencies into this species, which I found really fascinating.
That is fascinating. You used an interesting word, though. You used the word metric.
Yeah.
How do you judge something by its metrics? Like, let's use the meter, for example.
The what?
The meter, like a meter.
Oh, when I'm talking about a metric, right? Fairness is a metric, and we would measure it.
I know what you meant.
Oh, okay.
I'm using it in a different form.
Oh, okay.
I do kind of have a point where I'm going with this.
Okay.
So play along for a little bit.
Sure.
So how do you make sure a meter is a meter?
Well, you have to have a scale, right? You'd have to develop a scale, and you would have to test that scale, right? So in scientific research, for example, what you would do is you would go ahead and develop that scale, and then you would have different people make judgments, and then you would compare all those inputs. They would have to do it separately and not in conjunction with one another, and you get that back and you'd see if it was just all over the map. So if people were looking at my instructions as far as how those metrics should be measured, and what I get back is a whole bunch of different feedback on a similar test where they're all saying different things about the same set of subjects, then I know that my metric is not well defined and well measured. Right? But if I get back the feedback and I'm getting really high corresponding results, that's a good sign that this metric is working. Is that what you're asking?
Wouldn't that be the same for morals too?
Well, yeah, because I'm talking about moral metrics, in fact, right?
Right, that's what I meant by relating this
to
it. Sorry, I didn't mean to confuse you. But wouldn't we need a singular reference point in order to establish our morals and what we find morally correct?
Okay, wait, this is a different thing. So now there's the idea of, do you have a sense of fairness, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
This is a precept argument.
It's okay. And then the idea is, different people are going to apply this in situations differently. So you could have, like, for example, those moral dilemmas. You could be asking people what they would do, and they'll give you different answers, and some of them will say, well, I think it would be fair to handle it this way, I think it would be fair to handle it that way. There's been many times when you can look at a situation and say, you know what, I can see both sides of this. I can see why this person feels like they have a beef, and I can feel like why this person feels like they have a beef. And this is not an easy question to answer. You're talking about how the metrics are applied, not whether or not there are metrics, right? Yeah. So there is a sense of fairness, but now when a moral philosophy, if you want to develop a moral philosophy from that, if you want to say, like, I'm going to say that the most good for the most people is my moral philosophy, and every time something comes up, my sense of fairness, my sense of all this stuff is going to come into play underneath this moral philosophy that is most good for the most people. I'm not saying that's the way to that's just a moral philosophy somebody might use. But a lot of people have different moral philosophies or moral codes that they're going to go by about how they apply these things. But the metrics themselves are what is morality.
Yeah, okay, I understand. It's like using a foot, like using a foot ruler with a meter ruler. People are going to be slightly different, but it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, and some people are going to have a stronger sense of empathy. Yeah. Some people are going to have no empathy, and some people are going to have so much empathy that they may have trouble, using a can of Raid. I mean, there's some people that are going to have empathy that just overflows so far it even goes into like other species and things, right? Whereas some people are going to have no empathy even for other human beings. They'll see horrible suffering and be like, yeah, whatever. It's a range that happens, just like every trait in a species happens at different levels within different individuals.
But you can also tell that there are biological things that are part of us that lend themselves to empathy as well. I mean, take a look at mirror neurons, right? You can put somebody in a CAT scan, and if you show them someone suffering, maybe they get a hand injury, or maybe it's a foot or something like that, the part of the person watching's brain that relates to that hand or foot, you experience that. Your mirror neurons go off, and you can actually feel for somebody their pain, and those things are built into us.
And brain damage, your capacity to judge things. And, so for example, you can have people who have damage to emotional centers of their brain have difficulty making value judgments.
And on top of that,
that's like
on top of that,
that's
those
like the famous experiment with Phineas Gage and the frontal lobe. He had no empathy after the metal spike drilled through his head.
Yeah, so it can mess with you. Messing with your brain can really mess with you.
Just to complete the loop on that, though, there are different strengths of responses when it comes to mirror neurons. And so you can have people empathetically react much stronger than others. And in that way, you can put a number on it. You're not measuring a ruler versus a meter. It's very much, this is the strength of the response in the brain.
Okay.
All right.
That's fair enough.
I really enjoyed this call. We do have other callers. Did we hit most of your...
Yeah, sorry. We realized we took up a lot of time.
You know what, though? I think it was a really good call. It's really great to have an honest conversation with some folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I learned a lot, so thank you for taking our call.
Thank you for your questions, and thank you for actually calling and asking questions that you were genuinely interested in answers to, because we often get questions that people just want to manipulate a conversation. So it's great to have somebody say, I'm really asking because I'm curious.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Well, you guys have a good day then.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Can we clone them?
Oh, gosh, I wish they were every caller.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's the thing. I hope people understand that at the end of the day, it doesn't bother me that they hung up and they're still theists, right? It's like, that's okay. They called and they had questions and we had a conversation, we exchanged information, we found things that we agree on, even though there's a big thing we don't agree on. It was a cordial and informative conversation. I really, really liked it. So
Definitely. Same here.
You don't have to call the show to try to trap us. That's It's not where you learn.
No.
It's not where we learn. So it doesn't help anybody if you just call to ask a question that you already want to, you already have an answer in your head. Don't waste everybody's time with that.